Hello and welcome everyone. If you're new here, give me a like and subscribe, I would appreciate it, as I am trying to grow this channel, and though we are currently small, I hope to reach a lot more of you. Quickly now though, this is a preparedness channel. We deal with what we see happening around us and what we can extrapolate from that as to what is coming next. To do this, we need to stay abreast of new developments, which means a lot of research. My aim on this channel is to help you prepare for what is coming. You will see me add practical preparation ideas, themes and knowledge as we go, as well as prepping news. Now, I do not condone violence or disorder. I do not want to incite or start a riot. What you see here is usually what the mainstream media won't tell you, and it will not be sugarcoated. Keep in mind, anything I say you should be doing your own research on, and also I am not a financial advisor, so this is not financial advice, and you should always take your point of view and generate your own opinion on any matter by doing your own research and looking at multiple sources. If I say anything here, it is because I have found credible sources of information for it. With that out of the way, let's get into today's content. Firstly, I want to bring you all up to speed on what is happening around the world in the financial markets. In the last couple of weeks since I last made a video, the UK has narrowly avoided a pension-driven collapse. So what happened? Well, the pension fund managers, were trying to gain returns ahead of inflationary pressures in a bear market with huge uncertainty. For years now, they have been leveraging the funds they are supposed to secure. A good deal of that money was in government bond markets, which in the UK they call gilt. They put money here because it is supposed to be one of the lowest risk asset classes. But it's not quite that simple. What they did with the pension funds, which is the UK's version of KiwiSaver or America's 401k, was to place them in derivative contracts. These are contracts between the fund managers and sometimes third parties using your pension money as collateral for loaned and leveraged positions. This allows them to purchase many more bonds than they could normally, which is great if the bond or gilt yield goes up, but really bad when it goes down. With this type of leveraged position, if the money or value of the bonds held in reserve, like a bank's capital reserve requirement, is lower than the leveraged position, the derivative holders can make what they call a margin call, which can force the fund managers to sell off assets or bonds to cover their position. And this is exactly what happened, except because the long-term bond market is an asset class that is going to provide less of a payback than what you would lose in inflation, no one wanted to buy them, which caused the bond value to drop even further, and more derivative contracts to become in technical breach of the contract stipulations, until the Bank of England stepped in and purchased a lot, like £35 billion more bonds and more every day. They did this to provide liquidity and to keep that in mind, that as liquidity or lack thereof is what crashes markets and causes depressions. But the other side of the coin here is that the Bank of England's purchase of said bonds will inflate the monetary supply in the UK, and in 12 to 18 months it will become more fuel for the inflationary fire that is fast burning out of control. So the UK almost collapsed, and the Bank of England put a band-aid on their gushing wound and said it'll be okay for now. It is in times like this where investors are desperate to keep their money and its value. So what do? They fly to hard assets and reserve currencies. This right now is causing the US dollar to climb to a new strength, but also causing others to fall. The euro and the pound edge ever closer to being worth only what the US dollar is, and we here in New Zealand are now almost down to half of that. What this means for us is that if your business is an importer, or if you buy from a supplier that is an importer, you are paying prices that are hugely inflated. When you can't sell those at the rates you're asking, and the company can't make sales due to the cost of living crisis and people's buying power, or disposable income, or in other words, what they have to spend on any non-essential consumable items, then the businesses are in trouble and start to collapse. This is why what is coming next to economies that are largely reliant on importing is an avalanche of job losses and company failures and liquidations. Before we move on, I want to let you know what should be widely known by now but sometimes isn't: the fractional reserve banking system and why it matters. As we've covered before, prior to 1971, money was backed by physical gold and banknotes were redeemable for a set quantity of physical gold. But then the move away from the gold-backed monetary system to a debt-backed monetary system occurred. Now, days when you want to borrow money from the bank, they essentially write that into existence based solely upon your promise to repay it with interest. They don't have this money, but they need to have a fraction of it in liquid money, or they did. And this is so that when you come and ask for your money in cash, they can give it to you. Recently, fractional reserves have been lowering and changing in some countries. The smarter countries raise the liquidity requirement, and thus the fractional reserve has lowered, which means banks need to hold more reserves and have less risk. It is somewhat difficult to get a straight answer as to what has changed from this model. Prior to 2008, there was a fractional reserve in some parts of the world of 9-to-1, meaning the bank could lend out 9 times what it had in reserves held as cash. A simple Google search shows that the USA had a reserve ratio of 20-to-1 at one point. Apparently due to the COVID situation, that ratio is now 0. They don't even need to hold 1% of the money they lend out in reserve in a liquid reserve state. In New Zealand, you simply cannot get a straight answer out of our Reserve Bank, nor can you, it appears, speak to anyone except the receptionist, who will not answer any questions. To what follows is what information I can extrapolate from their website and relevant law changes I've seen and read through. What it appears to me to be is that in 2010 here in New Zealand, fractional reserve banking had its name changed to CFR, or Core Funding Ratio. Later on, when bail-in laws were enacted, your deposits into the bank count as part of their core funding ratio. As we the masses are bank creditors. Recently, the CFR has been raised to 75%, which would mean total liabilities cannot be more than 25% higher than the total money in the banks. Or in other words, 1 in 4 of us has lost all of their money and everyone else has all of their money either loaned out or tied up in property. Property and loans that are losing value and becoming harder to repay. And the reason they don't want you to withdraw your money is because it affects their liquidity, and yes, that is including your KiwiSaver as far as I know, even though KiwiSaver is held in a trust. If anyone has any more information or has actually managed to get an answer out of the Reserve Bank, please comment and let me know. Moving on now, what is of public interest in relation to the events that have taken place recently in politics in New Zealand? Well, I want to touch on a couple of things today. First up is a piece of legislation called Protected Disclosures or Protection of Whistleblowers Act 2022. Interesting enough, naming this act may breach your protection under this act. I know, that's funny, right? But then apparently so does disclosing information in bad faith, which namely means straight to social media without first bringing it to somebody who can slap you with a gag order, right? Maybe they should have called this the We Hunt the Whistleblowers on Social Media Act instead. What do you think? Yes, I know, that was short and bitter. Essentially, your freedom of speech, if there was ever such a thing, is now effectually gone and legislated against. But don't worry, I didn't blow the whistle on that because it was published on legislation.govt.nz. Although I'll note it wasn't reported on, was it? Next up is the Russia Sanction Act 2022. They probably should have called it the War Against All Russians Act, since it details that the New Zealand government can seize anything of value from anyone who helps Russia in any way, and simply being a Russian and owning property in New Zealand is considered to be helping Russia under this act. Even if you're not technically in New Zealand, but you have sent anything to a Russian friend, especially cryptocurrency, you could have all of your assets seized if you are a New Zealand citizen under this act. With this act, New Zealand has put in writing its side of the conflict it is on, and as such we are not able to be independent anymore. Granted, some of that is due to the ties we have with the West and the hold on over us from the IMF and the WEF and the UN. Next up on our reporting of what got passed while you were being distracted with other bullshit in the media threw at you in part of today's video is Income Insurance Scheme Enabling Development Act 2022, passed on May 24th, 2022. Well, there's not much to say on this. It was passed, but only in so much as to begin the work of nothing out a scheme that you will likely pay for, much like the ACC scheme, that if you lose your job you will get X amount of money from the scheme you are paying into. So this is everybody, essentially it's a precursor to a universal basic income or a tax on the employed, depending on how you see it. And next up is the COVID-19 Public Health Response Masks Order of 2022. Let's not take too much time on these as they can be boring, perhaps. So what is this act that was put through in September of this year in New Zealand? Simply put, they have repealed the COVID traffic light system, but still want to keep the right to force you to wear a mask when and where they want you to. So they have renamed it the Mask Mandate Order and kept it. So in short, COVID protection framework is no more, but if you visit a medical facility you still need to mask up. Out of all of the acts we have covered so far, this one is perhaps somewhat reasonable. See, I'm not outright against our government. If it's a reasonable idea, I will say so. This year, as recently as the 6th of October, yes, today, or a couple of days ago now, there are changes and amendments to the Animal Products Amendment regulations. I'm of two minds on this. On one hand, more regulation means more price increases, and the other recent changes almost apply primarily to chicken and eggs. On the other hand, there is a massive and ongoing, almost epidemic, non-seasonal, highly fatal bout of global avian flu, H5N1. This has caused hundreds of millions of chickens and other poultry the world over to be culled. This has been going on for a while, with the avian flu even having increasing amounts of cross-species infections occurring, and those that have occurred, meaning some humans who have caught H5N1, have a close to 40% mortality rate, which is pretty shocking. So this bill introduces more sanitary measures and risk management to our poultry suppliers, which is only prudent, but in reality, if we get a confirmed outbreak of that avian flu here, and it is only a matter of time since it is in migratory bird populations, then a mass cull will ensue here. Right now the populations of chickens for us to eat is plummeting. Come the Christmas break, it may be hard to find chicken to eat, let alone turkey at all. Now, I don't say this to scare you. I say this so that you understand what is happening around the planet and why the food supply crisis is just getting warmed up. Avian flu for chickens, swine flu for the pigs in the last few years, animal feed crop failures, droughts that have taken pastoral land away from livestock, causing their numbers to be culled, land grabs for rewilding or mining projects, foot and mouth overseas. The list goes on. When you start to look at this as a whole, and you hear about the culling of more than 12,000 cows recently here in New Zealand due to an outbreak of Mycoplasma bovis, it does not take a genius to see that destruction of the food supply, especially related to meat and poultry, is in full swing. Moving on again. Now let's look at war developments. What has happened recently? Well, two major things spring to mind. One, the sabotage of the gas pipelines from Russia and Ukraine into Europe, meaning the EU is going to be in for a very cold winter. And two, there was more nuclear saber rattling from Russia, and Russia's nuclear-capable submarine is on the move and maybe carrying a Russian Poseidon nuclear torpedo that could have up to 100 megaton yield, or twice that of the Tsar bomber, which up until now was the most powerful bomb ever tested at 50 megatons. This torpedo would make the claims that Russia made early on in its rhetoric, that the UK would be wiped off the face of the earth by a wave from a nuclear bomb, plausible, as the missile capable of travelling up to 10,000 kilometres underwater, almost entirely undetectable, and the resulting wave from such a detonation would be unimaginably large. This information, coupled with recent reports of the US is once again buying up anti-radiation sickness medication, leads us to believe that there is a good chance a nuclear war is on the horizon. I would go so far as to say that right now the risk of nuclear war is higher than what it was during the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 60s. There are also new reports that a very important bridge in Russia, the road to Crimea, and a 19-kilometer long bridge has been damaged to a point where it is now one lane in parts and requires extensive repairs. This is significant because at the beginning of this special military operation in Ukraine, Russia said attacks on such civilian infrastructure would lead to Judgment Day. And so now the rest of the world awaits with bated breath to see what, if any, retaliation there will be. Our media over here is reporting that Russia is blaming Ukraine for this attack and labelling it an act of terrorism. I believe that this, along with the Nord Stream gas pipelines, is more likely to be the work of the USA Secret Service or the CIA, as I think America has the most to gain from orchestrating these attacks, although I believe the American military is operating without say-so from Biden, because Biden is about as useful as a paper towel at trying to dry your entire body. Now, I want you to recognize something and think strongly on this. Do you have a normalcy bias? A normalcy bias is a cognitive bias which leads people to disbelieve or minimize threat warnings. Consequently, people underestimate what is coming down the line. So we also need to be aware of those around us with a strong normalcy bias, and if you are not, you could end up in a situation that you're preparing and those aren't, and they end up trying to take from you. This bias is likely to be more prevalent in those who have not faced any form of hardship and those who do not know what it's like to struggle, and they're often very headstrong and assertive in their belief that it's always going to be okay and that everything will somehow stay normal. Some people believe this so strongly that they fight hard against the very notion that things are deteriorating, or that you should prepare for a banking collapse, a world war, and one with an energy crisis and a supply chain failure causing mass starvation all at once. But that is what we are facing. This is the slow SHTF. If we only have those without also having a chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear attack also, we can consider ourselves lucky at this point. So okay, let's take a step back, shall we? I hope you are all preparing, and to lighten this video up a little here, I'll show you a little bit of my archery practice and a quick tour of my outdoor gardens over here, since it is spring now, and the reason I'm a little late with this video is because I was doing exactly what I've been telling you all to do, which is to get prepared, keep the gardens growing, fertilize the fruit trees. So in the last couple of weeks I have harvested some good cabbage, some pak choy, I've planted out some of the cauliflower I started in pots in the greenhouse a month back. I've been getting the tomatoes and tomato seedlings started, and also my seedlings for chilies, as I do like a good chili, and all of my fruit trees, which, in case if you are wondering what I'm showing you in the video here, my fruit plants are 2 cherry trees, 2 apple trees, a double-budded variety of pears, a nasty pear also, a lemon, a lime, an orange, a mandarin, as well as raspberries, strawberries, blueberries and grapes, and a double peach, nectarine and 1 plum. Other than that, right now, if you saw the trench, that is for potatoes that are planted. As soon as the potatoes come up, I'll be filling in the trench and covering them mostly so that they grow more and more and set more tubers on potatoes, which come from the root of the potato plant. So the essential takeaway here is with potatoes, more depth in the root system directly translates to more potatoes. In one garden bed I have planted a quick variety of Chinese pak choy. This will be harvested just as the outdoor corn can be planted in early December. I'll plant some early corn ready for Christmas this coming week in the greenhouse. Some people think you can't grow corn in the greenhouse, but I'm able to, as I have a front, rear and a top venting which allows a total height of 2.5 meters almost internally. So like last year, I'll get about 25 heads done in there in time for Christmas. I also planted cucumber, winter melon, 2 varieties of beans, as well as outside chilies. In the other side of my greenhouse, I'll plant tomato, capsicum, chili, and I have lettuce growing in there that are almost ready. At the point, essentially, my point here is that what I grow is for just 2 of us, and that you should plan for you and your family and set aside as much room as possible. If I had more room, I'd plant even more, but until I'm able to afford a lifestyle block or a small farm, this is what I can do. Now, we've all seen the continuation of inflation and stringflation. Most of us, the world over, are seeing less and less in the supermarket, and we have covered why this is. So please leave me a comment and tell me what you are planting and how you are getting prepared. A long time ago, I heard the saying, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And that is correct. The time is fast approaching. And if you have not managed to get your stuff squared away because you believe that the supermarket will always be full and your work will always provide you with the money to buy what you need without fail, and always during your lifetime, please keep in mind that modern convenience that we have enjoyed up until now has only been available for the last 60 or 70 years. Before that, things were not so easy to come by, and this time span is, it's most of our lifespan, probably most of our parents as well, if you are like me and still could be considered somewhat youngish. So my point here is that what is normal for us is not the normal for most of humanity's lifespan. The normal was growing and hunting your own food. Only recently has buying your food become more normal than producing it. Only time will tell the lengths to which you and your neighbours will go to when it is no longer easy to procure what you need to survive. If there is one thing that is certain, it is that we fight amongst ourselves over food, land, water and resources instead of working together as a community during the time ahead. Then chaos will ensue. Already there are musings of let's eat the rich being bandied about, and divisions setting in much faster than I had anticipated. Luckily, this isn't happening yet in my locality, but crime is rising, and a short, sharp fall when the road to the resources ends is what will happen. What else? Let's see. In New Zealand, over the past few days, we've had local elections take place. Pretty much everyone that voted, and that was not many of us, voted to almost entirely get rid of as many establishment local politicians as a vote in protest against everything that has gone wrong in the last 3 years since I've been in office. And I get it. I mean, we had huge housing price boom, and right at the height of that boom, the local councils went and did a special unscheduled RV review, so that now everybody is paying higher rates based on inflated house prices that they won't review again for the next 4 years or so. Whilst actual house values are now down close to 20%,
Hello.
and in some places more, They're reducing the core services like waste management and recycling, while also allowing government to push them out of their local water responsibilities. So we're going to end up with a separate water meters and bills. And if you don't know why that is a load of bullshit, I suggest you go and watch one of my earlier videos where I go into details about it. Alright, moving on. Did you guys see the article that came out recently about the WEF saying it has always been upfront and direct about the Great Reset agenda? Yes, they have, right? But we all thought they were an unelected body of snooty rich people with no power. Well, I expect some of the masses thought that, and thumbed their noses at them. Those of us in the prepping community see this body as what it is, the global dictators, and really every government is following this agenda because, and only because, of the fiat monetary system. The members of the World Economic Forum that have the influence in the World Bank and International Monetary System and other institutions are lending money to governments. And they're the ones saying, we will lend to you if you sign on to follow our agenda. And the governments are doing it. I wish some of them had the backbone to say no and disestablish the WEF and the UN. These organizations are just a form of unelected power that sits at the top of the pyramid and shits on us all. As they said, they are open about their Great Reset agenda. Their skill has been managing the technocratic dictatorship as a whole by not making public which leaders stand for election have signed on to the Great Reset agenda until after the elections are held and their candidates are selected. With us here in New Zealand, we need to try and make this an election issue. No Great Reset agenda, no ties to the WEF or the UN, and as it looks almost certain Labour and Jacinda Ardern will be ousted, we need to ask if Luxton has his hand in the WEF's cookie jar too. So, what was the point of today's video? What was the takeaway? What do I want you to understand? Well, there was a bit to it. Firstly, the banking sector seems to have changed to an almost default bail-in situation without telling you. I had anticipated that when bail-in occurred it would be announced and that you would simply not be able to get any of your money out, as is happening in other countries right now, like Lebanon, where they've said because of the financial crisis you can only get a few hundred out if you want a few thousand, etc. But essentially, your money is their money, as in it is part of their core funding, and any time you take cash out it brings them closer to not meeting their funding requirements. Hence why it's hard to get cash out, and more ATMs are going out of service. Secondly, the war is escalating, and finally the supply chain is collapsing and the financial sector is collapsing, and we are at a tipping point from a recession into now what looks to be a depression. And you will start to see people being laid off and companies tightening the purse strings en masse. So buckle in and prepare to get through, because this is not going to be a short fall. It may be harsh, but it'll also be prolonged as well. I expect further fall in stocks and currencies tied at all to the US dollar, except the US dollar. And the US dollar at the moment is kind of having its last hurrah, as trading with the ruble and the Chinese yuan increases and the world prepares for a reserve currency flip, and America prepares to fight tooth and nail to defend their global hegemony. If you've liked the video, please give me a like. I know I've been a bit tongue-tied there in parts of it. If you'd like me to put an email address in the description so you can message and let me know anything that you have found out or want me to talk about, I may do so. Also, if you've got anything to add, please comment, or even if you disagree with me, let me know. Just remember, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. So get prepared, and I will see you all in the next video. And lastly, as this video has been delayed and there have been some addendums I have to make here, Russia has responded to the attack on civilian infrastructure with attacks of its own on civilian infrastructure. Up until now, they have been very strategic and tried very hard not to damage core infrastructure at all. I mean, why take over a country and then to just have to rebuild it from the ashes? It's far better to preserve the working elements of the country, especially since it was once a part of Russia. And of course, our government here in New Zealand has unveiled its plan, at least in part, to impose fart and emissions taxes on farmers of livestock and possibly on producers of food also. And of course, this is all in the name of reducing emissions, which it won't do, which, as we covered, will happen when they starve you out as well. This is just getting more and more stupid at this point. We probably should throw them out of Parliament. We probably don't really have the luxury of even waiting till the end of their term to remove them democratically. More on that to come. Anyway, if you've liked the video, give me a like. If you'd like me to put an email address in the description so you can message me, let me know. And like we said just a second ago, failing to prepare is preparing to fail, and I will see you all in the next video.